keep the mic here. You don't have to.
Okay.
I've got the letters set pretty well.
Okay. Great.
It was kind of different concept with construction. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I would say it's a little sketchy. I think the fact that there's no way to, this is what I've heard from teachers, to keep telephone each other because there's no phone system that they personally have. I think that's an issue. You want teachers to collaborate, but unless they can get to the phone in their area to reach the phone of somebody in another school in their area, and to depend that everything is being done email, when the reality is that the teachers don't have, because they're moving, their laptop in front of them or near them to be able to communicate. I think it's very short-sighted, very short-sighted.
Yeah, I think there's still some things we're still working through.
But I mean, this whole idea that there's a phone for a whole area, one phone, instead of teachers having an individual phone. But then you don't want teachers to have to use their personal, you don't give a teacher a cell phone to use?
That's the
I mean-
argument. Sometimes the teachers will say, what's that? Oh, requirement. Okay.
Well, what did we record? I can voice my opinions.
Yes, you can.
I'm just saying, we should get started for the people who are watching, and then we can make sure we address
Oh, there are people watching, that's right, so.
That's the camera that he's using.
Okay.
So if we just kind of stand up here, that's okay.
We'll be okay?
We can,
Okay.
Not that we don't want to answer the questions, I just want to make sure that we're.
Well, good evening. We'll get started. I'm John Schultz, Superintendent of the Edina Public Schools. Happy to be here tonight. Just to let you know, we are recording on Facebook tonight, so we've got an interactive social media going on tonight, so it's kind of fun. So we're going to talk about the levy that's coming up. I want to introduce Susan Brott, who is the Director of Communications, and we're here to talk about the levy. Excuse me? And normally Margot Bauk is here, but Margot Bauk had a funeral in her family, so she's attending that funeral. But she's here in spirit and here and has helped us. We've done this presentation 30 times, so we can do each other's parts quite well.
So if there are some very specific finance questions that we're not able to answer, we will take those names down and have Margot get back to you next week when she returns.
Because she is the queen of finance. So we are here. This is a presentation on the levy. This is a very simple concept behind this levy, but it has a high magnitude. The levy is not for new things. It is to maintain the quality programs that we have here in Edina. It is equivalent to $13.3 million. We lose that $13.3 million on June 30th, 2018. And it is a 10-year levy, so it ran out. It runs out on June 30th, 2018. We have to start a new levy that will go for 10 years. If we don't renew this levy, we would cut $13.3 million. Actually, we would cut just a little bit more than $13.3 million. So it is a big number, and it is part of the operations of the school district. So I love to talk about this part because I think about my own daughter. My own daughter is a student at the University of Minnesota, and she's one of those students that worked really hard in school. And I remember one time in 6th grade, when she was in 6th grade, I came home from work, and she was working on her math, and I was helping her, and she was doing some stuff in algebra, and she was really struggling. I thought, oh my gosh, how is this poor child is not going to be able to do well in math. So when she worked through that, and one day I came home when she was a sophomore in high school. She was sitting at the table, and she had a graph paper. And on the graph paper, she had this beautiful graph, and she had a whole bunch of what are called differential and integral equations. I said, Ellie, what are you doing? She said, well, I am doing calculus. I said, calculus? I go, you couldn't do math in 6th grade and you're doing calculus. She said, Dad, equations turn into pictures. And I went, oh boy. She's now a major in math at the University of Minnesota, majoring in economics and actuarial science, and she wants to study insurance tables. So it has become, and at that age, I was not thinking about insurance tables. I was giving her a ride to a study session the other day, and she was going to meet with 3 other people. One person was from Hungary, one from Korea, another one from China. And she is clearly working as a student working with other people from other parts of the world. And that is the nature of our higher education. I think that's going to be the nature of our kids' careers. So this mission statement fits really well with what Ellys is about. She is creative. She builds knowledge, builds self-worth, ethical values, culturally diverse global society. Those are great words for kids that are going into the 21st century. And this has been around since 1989 and has proven the test of time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the resources that we use to educate our students. The first thing is the fiscal stewardship of the district. Edina Public Schools is one of 3 schools in the state of Minnesota to have a AAA credit rating. That high credit rating allows the school district to get bonds and dollars at lower rates, and also gives the public a sense of the fiscal condition of the district. They also have won the award for excellence in financial reporting through the MDE for 12 years in a row. And through the management, though, the school district has had to reduce $8.5 million over the last 10 years. So even though we are in great fiscal condition, we still don't get enough dollars from the state, so we still have to continue to reduce to maintain that we have balanced budgets. The state of Minnesota gives school districts $6,188 per pupil for 2017-18. So everybody in the state of Minnesota, every student in the state of Minnesota, $6,188 comes with those students to the school district, and then the school district uses that to educate students. So if you look at, and it's called the per pupil funding, it's what you hear from the state of Minnesota when they're working on budgets. And if you look back in 2003, the per pupil funding was $4,966. This green line is the line that the line that the state has provided school districts since 2003. This red line is the amount it would be if we included inflation. So there is a gap that has been growing in school districts over the last 14 years that keeps widening because the state isn't giving us inflation. So what we have to do is we have to go out for referendum to close that gap. So how do we get money? We get money primarily from the state of Minnesota and property taxes. So the part we're talking about are the property taxes. We get a little bit from federal, and we have some other local revenue like fees and other things that come in small amounts. When the state says that they're going to increase our revenue 1%, that means for Edina about $540,000. However, it does not equal the expenses. 1% of our expenses in Edina is $1.1 million. So sometimes people get confused when they say, well, the state gave you 1% revenue. That should be, some people think that's equivalent to our expenses. That's not the case. And that just shows that gap, that even though we get 1% revenue, our expense is more than that. How do we spend our money? We are, I always say, humans teach humans. Teaching and learning is a human-based industry. We have people providing a service. So 82% of our dollars is spent on salaries and benefits. If we take a look at how we spend the money in a different way, you can see most of it goes into instruction, into special ed, instructional and pupil support. Instructional pupil support are all the personnel that help support the teacher and what's happening in that in the classroom. So 80% of what we do happens, it comes out of general instruction, special ed, and pupil support.
And just to add to that, the instructional and pupil support also includes such things as, our social workers, our media specialists. It also includes transportation. So we basically look at it as anything that kind of helps the students on a day-to-day basis as part of that. So 81% of our expenses are tied up in student instruction and student support, which it should be.
So there are two types of levies. A levy is a tax. There are voter-approved levies, which is what we're talking about tonight, which is the operating levy. There's also bond levies, which facilities bond, which we passed to do all the construction that Edina has been doing over the last couple of years. And then there are non-voter-approved levies. Those are set by state formula. The state of Minnesota says, school board, you can levy a certain amount for certain things like health and safety, career and technical, integration, long-term facilities maintenance. Those are non-voter approved levies. So this is the state guides the school board in these levies, whereas these have to be approved through referendum. Do you want to say something more?
Just that when the state sets those formulas or whatever, so just as trying to channel Margot here a little bit, and she would say, the district can't just go out and the school board just can't go out and say we want to do it. There's definitely formulas for that. You have to have some local control, agreement on that, whether it's we have a long-term plan put together for our facilities, then it has to go to approval for the state before we're allowed to levy for that money.
So one of the examples that Margot uses how property values impact school districts. So if the school district, for example, is getting $1 million from the property in the school district, that $1 million is what we get. If a common question that Margot gets is when someone adds on an addition to their house, she will get the call, what did you do with my extra money? And what happens is that when Susan puts on an addition to her house, she has to pay an additional property tax to the county. And everybody else's property tax goes down. We still get the $1 million. We don't get extra dollars because she adds on to her house.
And essentially what it is that the majority of the revenue that we seek is based on enrollment. So long as our enrollment doesn't change, we don't get any more money. It's not tied to property value. We have one levy, that's the technology levy, that is tied to property value, and that's the only one that'll change. So a lot of times in Edina, we see property values going up, we see tear downs and new properties, but the district still maintains the same amount, just the distribution of the pie gets different.
Okay.
So we are looking at what is the referendum question on November 7th. And as Dr. Schultz mentioned, we've had a number of referendum in Edina over the last several years, actually many years, I should say. We have 3 that are currently on our records right now. So in 2015, we did have a bond referendum, as Dr. Schultz said. That is a facilities bond. That's for construction only. We are not allowed to use that money for day-to-day operating expenses. So when somebody says we just gave you money 2 years ago, they're correct. We did ask for money, and the voters approved it. That was for the construction. So a lot of times what people will say is bonds are for building, levies are for learning, the learning part being the day-to-day operations. So that money cannot be used for day-to-day operations. In 2011, there was a 2-question ballot. One of those was our capital technology levy, and the technology levy then does continue through 2021. So will we be back in 2021 asking for a renewal of that? I can't guarantee it, but the assessment would be made by the board and the administration at that time of do we still want that money continuing. But that continues on our property taxes. The operating levy, there was an operating levy question in 2011. That question brought in about $400 per student. What happened though is that in 2011, the state changed how it funds schools, and it had to do with property tax reform. And what happens is that $400 still comes to the district, so we still receive that revenue, but now it's one of those non-voter approved levies. It's no longer a voter approved levy, so the board is able to submit to the state to say, yes, we still want that $400, but it just becomes part of a funding formula from the state. So what we're looking at renewing right now is the 2007 levy that was approved. That was that 10-year levy. That's the maximum that we are allowed to ask local voters to approve is a 10-year levy. And so we're looking to seek renewal of that. And as Dr. Schultz said, it will expire at the end of the school year. So on the ballot, you will see one ballot referendum question, and that question will look like this. And so it's essentially, it's a two-step process. The school board took some time to assess how did we want to ask for that. Did we want to just go out for a straight renewal? Did we want to do for a renewal plus an increase? Then if we wanted to increase, what would that amount be? And then how would that increase happen? And so what the board decided is that yes, based on the funding gap that we've been dealing with, based on our increasing expenses, and while we try to keep those expenses in check and have made reductions over the last 10 years, as that chart showed, the gap continues. And so we want to be able to fill that budget gap a little bit. So we're looking to seek some additional revenue from our local taxpayers. That being said, we want to renew the current authorization. So this is $14.12 per student. That is the 2007 levy amount. That's what we're seeking to renew. And then what would happen is that next year it would increase by $445 per student. So that would go up to the $18.57. That would be in place for 2 years. And then in 2 years it would take another step up and go to a little over $2,000. And that $2,075 is the estimated cap that the state allows local districts to go to. So prior to the legislative change in 2013, Edina was at that cap, and now we're not, and so we're looking to go back up to it. This again would be for 10 years, and all of those figures would be tied to an inflation rate that the Minnesota Department of Education assesses, so they would continue up as with an inflation rate, and that is consistent with how our other operating levies have been. So when we look at comparisons in terms of the revenue that is generated from operating levy, when we look at our comparison districts here over in the West Metro, you can see that the green bars represent what is currently levied through an operating levy referendum in Edina as well as our neighboring districts. So in Edina, you'll see the $14.12 over on the left. If that is not renewed in November, that amount would go down to $0. Then if it is renewed and the increase is agreed to as it is presented, it would go up to $18.57, you'll see, and then the second bar up goes up to $20.75 in the year 2020. This is very similar to what Minnetonka did in 2015. They did that similar two-step approach, and so they went to $1,600 in 2015 as an approval, and then in 2020 they too will go up to that state cap. Eden Prairie went out in 2015 and increased their local operating levy referendum to about $1,800 per student. Hopkins is currently just over $2,000 per student, and they are seeking to renew this fall on the ballot. Wayzata also has a 3-question ballot in November. One of them is a bond referendum to build a new elementary school. One of them is a technology levy, but they are also looking to go up to the operating levy. They're looking to go to the cap right away. And that's really a locally decided thing. So why is Edina deciding to do the two-step? Based on the survey data that the board saw, and also recognizing that this is a burden on our local taxpayers and the other taxes that the local property owner pays, they wanted to do it gradually. So what is that tax impact, noticing that it is an increase? So the median value home in Edina Public Schools is about $509,000. So rounding that off to about $500,000, over and above what they're currently paying for the existing levy referendum, it would go up to $182 per year, or about $15 a month over what they're currently paying. And that's for that first step up. In 2020, the second step then, when it increases up a little bit more, would be about $50 a year for that same home value. The estimates are about $10 per year for $100,000 of home value. So assuming no change in home value, obviously home values fluctuate from year to year. But that is the tax impact. There's a larger tax impact chart on the school district website. We encourage you to visit that. There's also a tax calculator, so you can look at your property tax statement, identify your market value, type that in, and it'll tell you exactly how much you would owe in property taxes if this levy is approved.
So as I mentioned earlier, thank you. If our operating levy passes, we prevent $13.3 million worth of cuts, but also we maintain the quality programs that we offer kids every day in Edina. Edina is a go-to district for teachers. I worked at the University of Minnesota, trained teachers, trained principals, and the quality, the teachers always will have Edina, and actually all the western suburbs, but Edina is always the top of the list for teachers to come to. We will continue to ensure that we have students prepared for college and whatever their passions are. Providing personalized learning, we continue to learn about our students and continue to tailor the instruction and the curriculum for students and remain competitive nationally and internationally. I had the opportunity 3 weeks ago to go with some really high achieving school districts and met with their superintendents and their staff together, and it's amazing what the high achieving districts are doing that they all have in common. I would have to say though, I think most of those districts are copying Edina. I'm a little bit biased, but I think that's the truth. If it doesn't pass, I will have to cut a little over $13 million out of the budget. That's about 12% of the operations of the district. So that's a significant reduction in programs and services. We would have to reduce course offerings. We'd have to reduce fewer activities and programs for kids inside and outside the school day, increasing participation, increasing fees for athletics and other activities. A cut like this would be a decrease in teachers. When you decrease teachers, you end up increasing class sizes. So it would result in a class size increase. And then the professional learning that we all need in order to move education forward would also be reduced. So just to give you an order of magnitude, this $13.3 million is equal to 1.5 months of daily operating expenses. It's equal to 150 teachers, 365 paraprofessionals, 200 custodians, 75 administrators. And if you think about the annual budget of Valley View or Southview of $12 million, you can kind of get it's even more than about $1 million more than the annual budget of our middle schools. So this is a significant amount of money. Now, this is not the list that we would use to reduce. This is just to show you what the equivalents are. And we would have a process in place that would involve the community as well as parents and our staff if we had to make a reduction that large. So we are in the process of communicating, getting out and making presentations. There's also places on the web at Edina Schools website, .org, Referendum 2017. We have an email that is monitored by Susan. You have questions. We respond to those questions. We put those questions on frequently asked questions site. There's going to be some mailings going out the next, almost a mailing a week between now and the election. We've had public meetings on the 5th and 2 today. We're at the Senior Center this morning, met with some citizens there, which was a great meeting, and then meeting here, both here in the community center as well as on Facebook. So thank you to everybody who's attending. And then we have another one at the high school on October 24th. As I said, we are out and about talking about the referendum. We've had dialogues and conversations. September 22nd, absentee voting begins. At City Hall, you can get a ballot, and if you can't make it on November 7th or you want more flexibility on November 7th, you can do an absentee vote. And I think these are very important voting. There has been some referenda in the state and school districts that have won on the absentee ballot and actually lost in the booth. So they've won the election, but it's all been because of absentee voting. So this is becoming really important in organizing voting. On November 7th, we have 2 parts to the election. We have 12 candidates running for 4 board seats, and we have the operating levy that we talked about tonight. So with that, I'll take questions. This one?
Oh, yeah. So we're going to increase, I'm assuming that the 13 million passes, everything passes, and we're going to increase the per student levy. I'm sorry. I'm assuming the 13 million will pass, and it all passes. And what I'm interested in is what we're going to do with the money, the extra money, above the 13 million.
Yep.
So, and I'm not sure we've ever seen what that dollar amount is. I think we can kind of guess it's several $1 million. But it's $445 per student. Mm-hmm. We know that for the first bite, and then 2 years later it's another $215. So It's a pretty good percentage increase. It's about 50% increase over the. So what are we going to do with the money? I know you generally say we're going to attract teachers and so forth, but do you have anything specific you're going to do with the money?
So that does go to, if you remember that slide that I showed with the gap back here. So those extra dollars are to close that gap as close as we can to inflation, because we know that this inflation will continue to rise. So those dollars will go into closing that gap.
So right.
It would go
Right.
into salaries and benefits.
Right,
And
so I was going to say, we ran some numbers today because that question
you did?
came up
Okay.
this morning. And so looking at that, it is a combination of the historical underfunding, so to kind of backfill that gap that we've had, because we have made those reductions, but eventually we just can't make any more reductions and maintain the programs. And then the other part is that because we have increasing costs, and when we looked at what are those our costs increase about 3% per year. So we know that we need to be able to manage that, knowing that we're not getting inflationary increase on the revenue. And then also looking at, so because 82% of our expenses are in salaries and benefits, a lot of that will go to compensation. So we have all of our contracts settled, so we always kind of look for that. And so in order to maintain a competitive salary base, we know that would be part of it. So when we looked at all of the compensation and the salary compensation as well as the benefits to include health insurance and life insurance and all that stuff, it's about an 8% figure, that we're 8 to 9%. So that's going to be a large chunk of it will be taken up in the rising and increasing costs in salaries and benefits, because that's where most of our money is going.
So that suggests if it doesn't pass, we would have to renegotiate.
We can't really renegotiate our contracts without approval from the other side. But what we would have to do is that we would have to, we can certainly entertain that with them, but if they don't agree to that, what we would end up doing is eliminating positions. So I mean, that's because of the way that the employee labor agreements are set, that we would have to eliminate positions unless they did agree to come and say, can we renegotiate salaries? But all of those are contractually based. So that's kind of the difference when you look at corporate. We can't just cut salaries across the board.
Did that answer your question?
I would like to know why I should vote yes on this referendum, because there was an article in the Minneapolis paper a few days ago saying that Edina schools aren't as great as they say they are. Also, there are teachers that are pushing personal referendums, and that I do not like, because I don't want, like when you go to college, a lot of these professors are really pushing agendas. I don't want to see this in elementary and high schools. We should be taught what we have to do to go on to further ourselves in life, and I don't want any personal agendas being brought into the classroom. And also the article stated that test scores aren't as great as Edina is saying. Now, what is the truth on those? Because I would really like to vote yes, but right now I'm saying I would vote no.
Okay,
at this point.
let me take that question in parts. So after the election last November, I think the culture and the communities, even when I was in Hopkins, there was a lot of emotion, there was a lot happening, and is no different here in Edina. What we did with the Edina folks this summer was we trained them in the appropriate use of social media, because most of that information, some of the stuff that you're talking about with referenda, teachers having that messaging capability in social media, we trained them, had attorneys come in to talk about what their role is and what they can and can't say on social media. Because there are rules, and there actually are laws that kind of guide teachers on what they can and can't say. So we did that, and they've responded well to that. I know that also the principal at the high school has been working with those teachers also to guide them along. So we're really working hard with them to pay attention to that. So the second thing was the test scores. So the test scores that they were talking about in the article was the MCA scores. Excuse me. And the MCA scores is a test that it measures the accountability of the school, if you will. And it's measured by the number of students that are proficient in reading or in math. As we tease out some of the, especially the math, as we tease out some of the data, we're starting to see things of students doing test avoidance, not taking the test seriously, not spending a lot of time on the test. Because there isn't a whole lot, it's high stakes for the school, but it really doesn't mean anything to a student that may have taken a lot of AP exams. So we're kind of trying to tease and learn about that. We're also learning that maybe our curriculum needs to be aligned a little better with the students that are taking the tests. So we learn from those tests. What is really kind of interesting is that Edina showed growth in their ACT scores. And the ACT scores are the highest in the state. So that MCA score, we're scratching our head over that. And we're kind of teasing out and studying what that means. So the article, told gave you that information, and we're teasing that out. But we've addressed the issue with teachers and their agendas, as you indicated, as well as with the test scores.
And I would add that, in addition to social media, we've been doing a lot of training with staff, and I don't think that it was pervasive, that maybe there were some staff doing that, and we want to make sure that all of our staff understand that when you're acting as the professional on behalf of the district is different than what your personal beliefs might be. And we're just trying to help our staff understand that role, and that gets blurred a lot in this day and age, and we're just trying to clarify that role for people. But we do have additional information that will be up on the website in terms of what are those ACT scores, what are some other testing measures that we're doing, what are some, we have a lot of advanced placement scholars and tests that we have, so what are some other measures that we're using for quality as well.
Well, that's, yeah. Well, what's fascinating about that is that social media is so pervasive and out there that people from the outside will contact us, and parents will contact us, and students. So we're able to monitor that, and so you really rely on the eyes and ears of our public when you're a superintendent, and the principals also will have the ability to go into different course media sites, websites, to make sure that they're on task. Oh yes, yeah. And we have to do that to protect the teachers, but mostly to protect the students. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Wes, there's no questions back there on social? Okay. So did you have another question? Okay. We'll just give you a
Oh wait, he already had one.
Yeah. Have you found any organized opposition to the levy?
No, we have
I
not.
haven't seen any yard signs
The
or
only-
anything like that.
I would say the only yard sign, which is a really odd one, it's over by Creek Valley, where there's a vote yes sign right next to another sign that says stop wasting money. So I don't know what that means, but the vote yes sign's there, but we don't have any organized no vote that we know of. Anything else? Okay.
Thank
well,
you
thank
so
you so
much.
much for coming out.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, there we